we'll get started today. I'm Nancy Smith, the Director of Disaster Workforce Readiness, and I welcome you all to our Train People Pilot Disaster Workforce Engagement this afternoon. To get started, I'd like to take a little attendance here and do a couple of introductions. I have my technical expert, Mike Mason, joining me today, helping with the WebEx. He's the Manager of Leadership Development in our unit, and Lisa Bennett, the Executive Director of Disaster Workforce Readiness. Thanks, Mike. So let's see who's with us today from our pilot regions. Kara Sloman, are you on? Mike, do you want to unmute everyone?
Yeah, Nancy, sorry, I just did.
Great, thanks. Kara, are you with us? Anyone from Cascades?
Nancy, I see in the chat, Clint says filling in for Kara.
Great, thanks, Mike. Jessica from Central California, are you with us?
Nancy's and Cliff McCarty on the phone for her.
All right. Michael from Colorado, Wyoming.
Hey, this is JC filling in for Mike.
Thanks, JC. Welcome. Tom, are you on for Dakotas? God, I saw Tom in the... Anyone on for Tom in the Dakotas?
You've got Heather in the Dakotas.
Thank you. Chris from Eastern Missouri. Megan from Minnesota.
This is Teresa in for Megan.
Thank you. Colleen, are you on? Idaho, Montana. Charlie Maltby, are you on for Indiana?
Hey, Nancy, Janine's on from Crossroads. Charlie's got a DR going on.
Thank you. Brandon, Kansas, Nebraska. Anyone from Kansas, Nebraska?
Valerie.
Yeah. Okay.
Valerie, and was someone else there? Sonia from Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Tony from South Carolina.
Nancy, this is Karen. I'm on the phone. I don't think Tony's going to make it, but I'm not on the WebEx.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
This is Colleen Heilman. Nancy, I'm on the WebEx for Karen.
Thank you. Ken Turner from Western New York. And Rick Shue from Western North Carolina.
I'm here.
Thanks, Rick. Any regional disaster officer that I missed? All right, thank you. Next slide, Mike, please.
Nancy, stand by. I'm going to remute everyone and then open up yours and Lisa's line. One moment.
Okay. So, Mike's muting everyone, but you may also want to mute your own phones.
Okay, you're good to go. Yeah.
Great. Next slide, Mike. So the first element in our Train People pilot is to affirm the disaster workforce engagement position and the disaster workforce engagement team as the enablers of effective disaster workforce engagement. So we're going to be talking about that today, obviously, and there's 4 elements to this, 4 tasks that the region needs to complete. The first task is to implement or validate effective workforce engagement team structure and contribution to the objectives of the engagement process. The second is to implement both the disaster cycle services, engaged volunteers and employees process, as well as the volunteer services engagement guidance. To orient the workforce engagement position as the key disaster leader position to facilitate the effective implementation of a region workforce engagement program, and then to participate in the web-based engagement and recognition forums to identify and share best practices. To look at these tasks, we'll be covering today the agenda items that you see here. We're going to begin with our workforce engagement and then move to our workforce engagement team. The Train People pilot lane is going to be using a workforce engagement manager job description that includes a summary and responsibilities to ensure consistency and a common understanding of the roles and responsibilities during the pilot. This job description aligns with the roles and responsibilities in the engaged volunteers and employees standards and procedures and elevates the position as the leader of disaster workforce engagement in a region. As we look at the summary and description, think of the element that I just read, to affirm the workforce engagement position and the workforce engagement team as essential enablers of effective disaster workforce recruitment and engagement. So you see here that we begin with the summary of the workforce engagement position description. Leading and managing a primarily volunteer team, that's your workforce engagement team, to support and provide workforce engagement. Ensuring onboarding, engagement, development, retention, and recognition are provided to the disaster workforce. Those are 4 of the elements that are required in the disaster workforce engagement standards and procedures. Providing feedback on the success of the engaged process to the regional disaster officer. And working collaboratively with their counterpart, the regional volunteer services officer. So these are the summary of the position. As we look at the responsibilities next, again, we look at their leading and management of the team, but we want to broaden that and notice that they're focused on the workforce involved across the entire disaster cycle and looking at your communities and the regions that you serve to make sure we have a diverse workforce representation. They're also there to make sure there's good program support to the leaders and the disaster program managers and specialists, those that are supervising volunteers, and again, making sure that we have those 4 elements covered for all of our volunteer workforce. They're also charged with helping staff the regional responses with trained people that you have available, that the performance is measured, recognition is conducted, and the retention metrics are achieved. As we continue with their responsibilities, we have that they develop and support the volunteers as equal team members with specific responsibilities. Again, this is the 3rd time we've seen this. That's how important making sure all of our volunteers get onboarding and placement, development and training, recognition and appreciation, feedback and evaluation. Those are key to retention of our volunteer workforce and thus increasing our capacity. They need to be the ones coordinating and inputting the preparation and the updating of our needs assessment. And then they see the oversee the development of volunteers and staff services and the staff advocate positions for DRO assignments and deployments. These responsibilities mirror the department responsibilities in the volunteer engagement cycle. The Workforce Engagement Manager and the Regional Volunteer Services Officer collaborate extensively on this to make sure that the regional volunteer goals are met both in volunteer services as well as disaster cycle services. And this is the first step in implementing the Volunteer Services Engagement Guidance as well as the Engage Volunteers and Employees Process Doctrine from Disaster Services. The second step is development of the Disaster Workforce Engagement Team that we saw in the summary and the responsibilities of the Workforce Engagement Manager. The team starts with building the required steady state regional program lead positions, which includes the ones that you see listed here. Excuse me. The responsibilities of the Workforce Engagement Manager had a lot of verbiage in there with leading and ensuring and supporting. And this is their avenue to do that, leading this volunteer team to help round out all the activities that need to be done with our volunteer workforce. So this group of volunteer leaders forms the core of that workforce engagement team. And then volunteer services and regional disaster officer team representation also make up the core team. And then regions are encouraged to include other members on the team as needed to get the work done, perhaps the regional health reviewer or some of the functional leaders. Program leads here monitor and perform some of these activities and manage the total engagement of our workforce. And here you can see what some of their major high-level responsibilities or tasks are. The details of these positions are all found in the EVE Doctrine, the framework, the program essentials, and especially the standards and procedures and job tools are all posted in the Engage Volunteers and Employees Toolkit. And each of these leads performs their associated work with a team of their own workers. So the teams are structured as needed in the region to get the work done. And not all the teams need to look the same, but the structure needs to work however it can in your region with the people that you have and the workload that you have. So a workforce engagement structure may look like this, where you have an onboarding and placement regional lead that has a chapter coordinator in one chapter and a team leader in the other, both who have team members working for them. Both of these people, the team leader as well as the chapter coordinator, report to the disaster program manager, and their team members report to them and work with them to get the disaster orientation, new interviews done, placing the volunteers, engaging them in opportunities, and assigning them a supervisor. They have a dotted line to the regional program lead who provides that oversight, monitors how they're doing, answers their questions as a subject matter expert, and ensures that the standards are consistent throughout the region and that they're being met. The onboarding placement workforce engagement team leader and the chapter coordinator, again, report to the disaster program manager, and we'll look at that relationship in a minute. Another structure may resemble this, where the onboarding placement regional program lead has 3 team members reporting direct to them because of the workload, because they don't have onboarding placement team members in each one of the regions because they don't need it. Whatever the reason is for the workload and the region's capabilities and needs. And then they have an onboarding placement chapter coordinator. And you'll see here where the 3 team members are reporting and working directly with the regional program lead, but the chapter coordinator has a dotted line because the chapter coordinator is reporting directly to the disaster program manager, but using the onboarding placement regional program lead as that subject matter expertise. Both of these structures are correct, And again, the structure depends on the needs of the region. So let's look at what the workforce engagement team does. All of the positions I showed you before of that core team are listed here with the volunteer services and the regional disaster officer representation. Our team is highly interdependent, though, and it's crucial to the success of their being effective. So as you'll recall, our workforce engagement team aligns with the department and the both volunteer engagement cycle responsibilities. So you see here on the next slide how it's going to work. We have the workforce engagement team, and those are the required regional program lead positions, again, because they're the key lead for disaster workforce engagement. Think of them as the A to Z of and for disaster volunteers, from their entry to their initial engagement, development, their ongoing engagement, promotion, deployments, and hopefully retention. The team should become the go-to group for everything disaster volunteer related. They're the focal point to make sure that engagement is happening across the board and continuously with some of our volunteers that want and have that much time for promotions, training, and recognition. And again, they work with those supervising the volunteers and those in the program areas meeting volunteers and the volunteers' needs for where they want to go and what their goals are. So a large part of their work is really planning, oversight, and coordination, and knowing what events and programs need volunteers when, where, and type, etc. And that's where the whole regional team comes in and why this group becomes central to the engagement of volunteers within the region. So let's look at how that fits in with the regional disaster officer, our program managers and specialists, their volunteer partners, our functional leads, and our regional program leads. This group provides the workforce engagement program folks their information. What do they need? What are their program plans, the program events, and their training needs? So here you see how that might work. Let's start with the gray box down in the bottom left-hand corner. Our leadership development person has been provided 2 names of potential leaders by regional program leads. And when the workforce engagement manager talked to the RDO about these 2 new leaders that we've identified, that person talked to the DPS who would like to really observe their leadership style before continuing with their leadership development. And then the green circle on the top left-hand side shows you that the disaster program manager and the mass care chapter lead in a part of the region want to update 200 shelter surveys by March 30th, and they have 3 new mass care service associates who've been onboarded, placed in mass care, and provided with their training career path, and they're working on it. And then we move to the yellow box, which shows that our workforce engagement onboarding placement regional program lead has 10 new volunteers that are being contacted for screening, and they want to begin their onboarding and placement with them. Finally, in our orange triangle at the bottom, we have a disaster program specialist for another area in our region, and their mass care shelter territory team leader have a shelter exercise scheduled in 3 weeks. Now, they have the shelter volunteers, but they really need folks to play the clients, and they'd really like 50 if possible, or even more. So this all comes to the workforce engagement team, who supports these activities by doing their tasks, coordinating, initiating, and follow-up. So the engagement and leadership development leads provide the disaster program manager and the mass care chapter lead with the names of those 2 potential leaders and 6 new workers to complete the shelter surveys. And based on the knowledge of those volunteers, the 6 that they send, as well as the 2 potential leaders, they determine, the engagement person, the leadership development person, and the disaster program manager and that mass care chapter lead, who's going to contact the 8 of them to get that task done. That can be anybody as long as we know who's doing that contact. The onboarding placement lead provides the disaster program specialist and the mass care shelter territory lead with 13 new volunteers to participate in the shelter exercise. So we're immediately engaging those new volunteers, and the volunteer connection lead, reviewed the volunteer connection hour reports for all the mass care workers. And the workforce engagement team contacted those that have mass care sheltering who haven't been active for a while, and they got another 20 workers to participate. And then the workforce engagement manager and the regional volunteer services officer talked, and the volunteer services team is going to fill the remaining client positions, which will give the volunteer services workers exposure to a shelter and some of the ongoing activities in a disaster operation. So this is how that all pulls together. And the training regional program lead reviewed the 3 mass care service associates up in that green circle. And one of them has all their shelter courses done, and the other one hasn't done anything. So the workforce engagement training regional program lead contacts the mass care chapter lead and the disaster program manager up there and determines who's going to call the person who hasn't done anything and who's going to call the person that's completed their training to let them know that we can now put the shelter service associate gap on that volunteer's profile. So our workforce engagement team and our regional disaster team, program leads, etc., all work together to do this interdependent supportive regional team with information going back and forth. Think of the workforce engagement team as the thread that intertwines the program human resource needs and the opportunities with volunteers' motivation, goals, and satisfaction. The team's oversight monitors the engagement, works to engage all of the volunteers, and ensures a well-rounded disaster program as the team working with the workforce engagement manager that brings us back to the fact that they should be the key leader for disaster workforce engagement. And this interdependency and this back and forth and having them be the leader affirms how they need to be the engagement position in the team need to enable the effective disaster workforce engagement, or our element today. Now, there's a few keys to the successful interdependent supportive team that we just talked about, centering really on 2 main areas. First is orienting the regional team, shown here in the purple-pink oval, that workforce engagement manager and the team are the key disaster leader positions to facilitate that effective implementation of a good regional workforce engagement program. The second is, once oriented by the regional team, is that the regional structure and activities regarding the volunteers align to enable the workforce engagement team to effectively implement their responsibilities and tasks. I know 2 things here. One, you probably don't have all the regional program required positions for the workforce engagement team. We know that, but it's a start, and we know where we're going. And 2, some of us or some of you don't do everything the same as far as the onboarding and placement and all the other things that workforce engagement was talked about in this. And that's okay, as long as we make sure that we're going back to our fundamental element here, that the team is the primary effective implementer of our engagement of our volunteers. So the consistency and the interdependency needs to be worked out with that group, and then some of our activities and the regional structure needs to perhaps be realigned to enable them to do the job that we just talked about. And then there's that regional or the dotted line rather to the regional program leads and the chapter territory coordinators, so that flowing through the disaster program managers and the program specialists and the regional disaster officer is all coordinated, but some of that big picture circle engagement of our volunteers and their motivation is all done and seen in this coordinating body in the workforce engagement team. And the other couple of things that I talked about is the other parts of the success of this, and that is the implementation of the Volunteer Services and Disaster Cycle Services Engagement Guidance, which is published in these toolkits. Volunteer Services Guidance centers around the volunteer engagement cycle that we talked about and I showed you earlier, and is the enterprise-wide department responsible for volunteers. Their guidance and doctrine are used to form the Disaster Cycle Services Volunteer Guidance, as you see in the construct of the Workforce Engagement Team and its relation to the volunteer engagement cycle. And the Engaged Volunteers and Employees Toolkit houses the framework, the program essentials, and the standards and procedures and job tools for the Workforce Engagement Manager and the team and volunteer supervisors. And 4 members of the Workforce Engagement Team have counterparts in Volunteer Services. Volunteer Services has a Volunteer Services Engagement Lead, the Recognition and Appreciation Lead, a Volunteer Connection Lead, and of course their Regional Volunteer Services Officer. And the Engagement, Recognition and Appreciation, and Volunteer Connection Leads are all required in all departments within the Red Cross that use volunteers. So our Workforce Engagement Team members that hold those 3 regional program lead positions should be collaborating and working together intensely with their volunteer services counterparts. That's how we can ensure we have a department or a disaster cycle services recognition and appreciation that then feeds up into the regional recognition and appreciation that volunteer services is responsible for. The collaboration between the 2 program leads for volunteer connection will help ensure that people have the right access and that our quality and our data is accurate and up to date. And the engagement, as you saw in the slide example, I used the volunteer services team that's coming to fill the shelter, the remaining client shelter positions. Volunteer engagement lead from both volunteer services and disaster cycle services can do that collaboration for other opportunities of engagement region-wide with other lines of business. So these 4 areas of collaboration are even more intense than the collaboration throughout the workforce engagement team. And building on your successes when we get this moving in the pilot lane of trained people, we'll be looking at some areas in our 2 web-based forum threads in Yammer during the pilot for you to share your experiences. Build on others. You can put your successes here. You can try out some of someone else's successes, so we want you to visit often and post a lot. And then additional support processes and resources that we have include access to these support tools. We'll have the SharePoint site available. All the pilot resources will be stored in this location, including the Workforce Engagement Manager job description that we're going to be piloting. It'll include a priority deployment list, which you'll probably hear about in one of the upcoming webinars that we're talking about. This will be used by Workforce Engagement and some of the activities to help get folks promoted to different levels within their groups and activities and positions for operations. We have our Yammer, which is the chat tool that allows you to do cross-regional sharing of information. And then our new email for Readiness Initiative trained people at redcross.org. That's the go-to email address for your questions, comments, and concerns. And then we have the two forums that I mentioned earlier, the recognition forum and the engagement forum that we'll want you to participate in and make sure you take things and try to apply them, as well as totally add your success stories so we can move this forward and share our best practices. And our final area of discussion today, of course, are our measures associated with this element. And our metrics are really the successful implementation and participation in the 4 regional tasks that I talked about. The actions, and thus the metrics, relate to the first element in the pilot lane, which again is to affirm the disaster workforce engagement position and the disaster workforce engagement team as the enablers of effective workforce engagement. Using this web-based assessment tool, you'll document these metrics and your participation in them, and then we'll show the progress on the monthly dashboard. So before we move to questions, I'd like to call on Lisa Bennett, again, who's the Executive Director of the Disaster Workforce Readiness Unit, to say a few words. Lisa?
Thanks, Nancy. That was a great presentation. Lots of information. Hey, welcome back, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. You know, this element, the DWE element, is probably, I think, the most important element of what we're trying to do here. This role of disaster workforce engagement is the foundation for success for everything we do, right? We can't, I mean, if you think about standing up a DRO or a relief operation of any kind, and you can't do it if you don't have people who are doing the work of getting the volunteers involved. It's the foundation for everything. So it's extremely important. And we're really excited to be piloting some new tools and new ideas in this lane. And just to remind you, from the overview webinars, and by the way, if you have not, were not able to participate in an overview webinar, please do go to the Exchange page and view the recorded version, because there is some really good information in there that'll give you kind of a foundation of what we're doing in the pilot. But you know, as a reminder, this is really part of a larger capacity building effort, and the Trained People pilot is testing out a number of new concepts. And the new job description that Nancy went over here, or not job description, but it's really position description, roles, responsibilities, that Nancy went over in this presentation is something that we feel extremely passionate about and really want to work with you to test it, get your feedback, and really help to elevate this role to one that is the key leader for this process in a region. And we also, the same applies to the Disaster Workforce Engagement Team, which is really you know, the group that is going to be responsible for getting this work done. And so, as Nancy said, we know that a lot of you're at different stages in this process. Some of you may be very far along down this road, and some of this may be remedial to you, and I apologize for that, but we do want to get everybody kind of on the same page about where we're trying to go, and so we really wanted to share all of that detailed information so that we were all kind of starting in the pilot together with the same level of information. So if you're a region who's a lot farther down the road and maybe you've already got your DWET all implemented and working fabulously, we are counting on you to share those best practices and participate fully in the forum and help others and give us a lot of feedback. So I think that's probably all that I had to say. So I think we're going to go to questions now, right, Nancy?
Yes, we are. So due to our great participation today and the noise on our technology, if you have questions, which I hope you do, please type them in the chat box. Access to the chat box is on the right-hand side of your screen at the top. If you don't have it open, you click on that. You can type your questions in the area and send them to Disaster Workforce, host and presenter.
And Nancy, this is Mike. We already have several queued up, so we can begin while folks are typing in more. First is an easy one. Will today's PowerPoint be shared?
Yes. Mike, did we record this PowerPoint?
We are recording it, yes, and we'll have the slide deck available also, both on the toolkit.
Right. So they'll be posted in the Engage Volunteers and Employees Toolkit as well as on our SharePoint site. Next question, Mike?
Second question. I'm sorry?
Nope, second question. Go ahead.
Second question. We can have chapter coordinators. They weren't listed on the list of positions provided when we did the needs assessment. We were told not to stray from that list. If we could have chapter coordinators, that would be wonderful.
Nancy, are you taking that question or am I?
Well, you can if you'd like.
The chapter coordinator position is an optional position on the new regional steady state table of organization. I'm not sure why they were not on the list. Do we know why, Nancy?
No, there should be a workforce engagement chapter coordinator, team leader, and team member.
Right. So all of the functions have an optional chapter coordinator. Now, not every chapter or every region will want a chapter coordinator. Some of them may just use team leaders, but that position is an optional position available. So I'd be interested. Maybe you could put into the chat if others experience this as well. It may have been some kind of a glitch in the system that we need to look into. And you will have another opportunity to update your needs assessment at the end of September. So if you didn't get that in there for whatever reason, you'll have another opportunity to do it. So you don't need to worry.
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay.
Blake, do we have another question?
We do. I'm not understanding how the chapter and region interact and are related in this workforce engagement process.
Okay, if I'm understanding what the person isn't understanding, I will try. So at the chapter level, there's usually a DPM who has responsibility for that particular geography. The region needs to decide about what optional positions they're going to have at the chapter level based on the size, complexity, and workload in the region, which is why we aren't prescribing a specific chapter structure. We're prescribing a required leadership structure at the region level, but leaving the rest of it up to the region with concurrence of their division to decide. So the reporting structure for any of the structures that might be implemented at the chapter level would be that those volunteers report administratively to the DPM who has that geography, and then have a technical support, functional kind of reporting relationship with the regional volunteer lead in that function, so that there's it's a matrix sort of reporting relationship. If that didn't answer your question, then I didn't understand the question, and please try again.
Okay, we'll see if that person comes back with any clarification. So the next one, this one may need clarification also, but let's give it a shot. This person has the same question about completing the TO for a level 3 disaster as was discussed on Tuesday the 11th.
I'm sorry, I need more. I don't remember exactly what questions were asked on Tuesday, and there were multiple. I definitely need more.
Okay.
Sorry.
So if that participant could perhaps clarify that question, hopefully we can come back to it. Okay, next question. Is there a reason that the volunteer services and disaster cycle services volunteer leads can't be the same person covering both jobs?
Not really, but that would be dependent on the work that's needed to be done in your region. But it could be, as on the disaster side of the house, we can have more than one position filled by the same volunteer. And I would think with agreement between the regional volunteer services officer and the workforce engagement manager, that can happen in that realm as well. As long as we are getting the work done that needs to be done.
Nancy, do we know for sure that volunteer services doesn't have a rule against that? We don't, but do we know for sure that they don't?
Not 100% sure, but I'm 95% sure.
So we think it's okay, but we'll take that back and find out for sure. From our perspective, it's okay.
Okay, so our next question, please make clear how to participate in the Engagement and Recognition Forum.
Well, Mike, I'm going to speak for Lisa and myself here. Could you show people how to do that, seeing as these two technology people aren't quite there yet ourselves?
I actually think some of the forum explanation is going to be contained in one of the other webinars, and there will be some formality to participation in the forums, as well as in the overview webinar we talked about review of the dashboard and some other calls that we'll be having. So there'll be a formal schedule of participatory sort of activities, and we will get that to you. We don't have slides or anything to show you right now on the forum, so that'll be handled in a separate webinar.
Okay, our next question. How are we going to learn to use the web-based assessment tool?
The web-based assessment tool, it will be web-based and entered into a SharePoint site. It also is an Excel spreadsheet. In both the Steady State TO webinar and the Level 3 and Gapping webinar, that tool will be explored in depth. So if you can just, I know you're excited to use our new tool. If you can just hang in there for a few more days, you'll get walked through it in great detail.
Okay, great. Next question. We have many of the positions filled, but are not one of the pilot regions. Is that okay to continue? And this person provided examples like the onboarding chapter coordinator or deployment chapter coordinator.
So we have a spy from a non-pilot region on our call. Just kidding. Don't anybody call Harvey and tell them I said that. Yes, certainly. The Steady State Table of Organization, the Volunteer Needs Assessment, all of that was released to all regions. The Level 3 TOs, which will be being released here shortly, are being released to all regions. This is because all regions need to do the Volunteer Needs Assessment, and they need our information from disaster to do it. So while everyone has it and we are fine, more than fine, want everyone to begin to implement and use, the pilot regions will have a lot more focus and a lot more support given to them during this implementation, so that, and we'll be collecting feedback from the pilot regions in order to make improvements and doing measuring activities and then using those measures to also make improvements. So it is released to everyone. Yes, please use it. Yes, please move forward. It doesn't matter if you're a pilot region or not. So I hope that answered the question.
Okay, great. We do have a few more questions, so let's continue on. Next one. To make sure I understand the position, there are 7 regional DWE leads, and each one of those positions has an optional level to also have a chapter lead and or chapter teammates. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I would add, I'll add a couple of things. One, there's no expectation that you must replicate the regional structure at the chapter level. In fact, we discourage just the wholesale replication of that structure, because what we want is for you to really look at what you need in terms of structure at the chapter and territory level to get the work done. So if it's a large active chapter and you need a chapter coordinator and several team leaders, great, do it. But if it's not an active, super active chapter, or doesn't have a ton of work, and you can do it with one team leader and a couple of team members, then do that. So it's entirely up to you. The other thing, oh my gosh, it went completely out of my head. I'm so sorry. I had 2 things to tell you about that, and I completely went out of my head. Well, if I remember, I will try again. If I didn't answer your question, fully, please write Mike again.
Okay, so on to the next one. Is the DWE expected to report in monthly on all new volunteers onboarded and their progress in development? I just want to make sure I heard you right.
Nancy, I think that's your question.
Yeah, I would think that would be dependent on what you and your regional disaster officer decide what and how often you need to report to them. And when we get to the tables of organization in the next 2 webinars that Lisa mentioned, you'll see part of the information that can be reported on that and tracked for you in our web-based tools. But what and how often you need to report would depend on the relationship and the information that your regional disaster officer needs.
I also believe that information is reported on the volunteer services dashboard. Is it not, Nancy?
I think some of it is, yes, but I'm not sure the specific training things are.
Okay.
Okay, I think our next question, I'm going to kind of combine 3 different questions into one here. This is about location of all these tools. So where will the dashboard, the forums, and the TOs be located, and how do we get to the SharePoint site?
So the SharePoint site information will be shared with you. You'll have by the time you're done with all these webinars, you'll have full knowledge of how to get to everything. And I'm sorry, Mike, give me the first part of that question again.
So specifically, where will this PowerPoint be, which we already answered is on the SharePoint site.
Also
where
in the
will the dashboard? Sorry?
Yeah, it's also in the Eve toolkit. And the dashboard, when created, will be, the dashboards will be both on the SharePoint site, and there will be a formal process for sharing the dashboards with you. There'll be one call for all pilot regions to participate in together so that we can sort of look at things in aggregate, and then there'll be individual dashboard calls. And in fact, we're working on a process right now to collaborate with volunteer services and possibly, I'm not making any promises here, but possibly include our dashboard with their dashboard when that review is done so that they're done together. That's something we would like to pilot with you all, but we don't have the process formalized yet.
And also the TOs, where will they appear?
The steady state TOs are already posted, and they're posted in the EVE toolkit and also on the volunteer services page. The level 3 TOs will be posted in the EVE toolkit as well, right, Nancy? And
yes, and probably in the ConOps toolkit, I believe.
And the ConOps toolkit, okay.
And of course, just to clarify, the EVE toolkit is a toolkit on the Exchange, which is,
yes,
is currently live.
Yes.
So the final question that I have on here is, can we share the actual address to the SharePoint site?
I don't think we're ready to do that yet, are we, Nancy? Because I don't think it's completely finished.
Yeah, I don't think it is either.
They're still loading the assessment and some of the other tools into it. So no, we can't do that yet. But I promise before August 1st you'll have it. Didn't promise things like that. Big thing will happen.
We have one more question on the chat window, and then after that we will open the line up for any questions on the phone, and we can still take a few more on the chat window. We do still have about 8 minutes left. So our last question here, are all 7 regional positions on the DWE team expected to be also, I think also run staff services during a DR? That is a lot of knowledge and weight to carry.
Nancy, I'm going to let you answer this one because you have the most experience and wrote the DWET guidance.
Yes. The workforce engagement teams need to initiate staff services. But that doesn't mean they need to all convert over and run the whole thing. They certainly need to start it. Volunteer services needs to work in LCV and do the EBV process, especially on your regional operations. But that's dependent on what those 7 team members, if they have a gap, and what their gaps are. Of course, I prefer that all workforce engagement folks have a staff services gap, but that may not be where those volunteers want to volunteer on an operation, if they even want to volunteer on one. But the workforce engagement manager needs to somehow, with what she has, either he or she has with either the workforce engagement team or other regional volunteers, initiate staff services on operations.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. So that's the last of our questions on the chat window. Like I said, we can still take more if somebody thinks of one. In the meantime, I'm going to briefly unmute all the lines, and we'll see if there are any remaining questions on the line, or potentially from people who are on the phone but not on the WebEx. Keep in mind, please mute your own phone if you don't have a question, so we don't have much background noise. So I have the lines open now. Are there any questions on the phone? Again, any questions on the phone? Okay, I'm not hearing any. I've remuted the line. Looks like we have one more question on the chat window now. Is the goal for this pilot to fill the DWE positions and align the position to fit the description?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I can't answer the question because you muted me. The goal is to provide some standardization to the position description across the country eventually. The goal for the pilot is to test what we have created currently and see how it works in a variety of size regions. So beyond that, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. We're testing this. We think this is the appropriate role. Let me also say, so disaster workforce engagement managers across the country, FTEs, so full-time employees across the country, have different job descriptions in Workday. So there are, lots of different job descriptions. I don't know if there are exactly 60 different ones, but there are quite a few different ones. And so one of the things we're trying to do is to standardize that position description. While they're different, they had a lot of similarities. And so what we did was to take all of those job descriptions and pull all of the similarities together, and then look at our guidance, look at the outcomes that we hope to gain, look at the structure in the region. We took that into account, all of the recent the job description changes for DPMs with the FLSA implementation, and just all of that, and came up with I'm kind of calling it an addendum to a job description, a functional job description. And that's what we're testing in the pilot.
And we have a clarification on that question. In other words, what are we accomplishing by the end of the year?
What are we accomplishing by the end of the year? So I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. So the two things that are being implemented across the country, the steady state table of organization and the level 3 capacity building effort, by the end of the year, what we're looking for from every region is that they would have performed the assessment and implemented their action plan to fill positions that they don't have qualified workers for or candidates in. For pilot regions, our goal is for the pilot regions that go through the process this year is for them to have done these things really well, for us to provide the support and focus to help you implement these programs in the best possible way, and to test the roles and responsibilities of the DWE and test the DWET implementation for us to make tweaks and then even make changes before the next pilot group goes through. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but if not, please try again.
Okay, so that was the last question that we had on the chat, and we are now at the top of the hour. Lisa, do you want to close up?
Sure, I'll just wrap us up. So first of all, thank you for all of your. I'm always really excited to get a lot of questions because it makes me feel like people are engaged in the process. We will continue to answer your questions. If you have additional questions, feel free to email us at ritrainedpeople@redcross.org. Was that right, Mike? We will happily, there we go, perfect. We will happily answer your questions, and if you prefer to call one of us, please feel free to do that as well. Please do participate in all of the additional webinars that are coming, and if you can't make the live webinar, please do watch it, because I do think there's going to be a lot more information coming. We're going to walk through some tools and explain a lot more. Again, if you didn't overview webinar, I highly recommend that you do that. It's only an hour. I say only an hour. I know you all are very, very busy, but please try to do that. Thank you. My team is super excited. I'm super excited to work with you all for the next few months, and I'm just super excited to, be working that closely with Regions on some of these projects. So thank you, and I look forward to chatting with you again next week at our next webinar.